I would introduce Floris Gierman, the guest of today's webinar, Knowing to Doing, Personal Record with Maximum Aerobic Function. Guys, Floris Gierman is a running coach, and not only that, he is an endurance athlete, extremilist podcast host, and a YouTuber. He is also the co-founder of Path Projects, a running clothing company. Floris is a strong believer in a holistic approach to training, racing, and life. He was initially inspired by running coaches such as Dr. Phil Maffeton and Arthur Lydiard. He is always interested in ways to become a stronger, healthier, and happier athlete. He loves to run, and he runs fast, he runs short, and he also runs long distances. It's amazing to know his personal best. His current personal record in full marathon is 2 hours and 44 minutes at the most prestigious Boston Marathon. He has also done a self-supported 100-milers. I don't know how 100 miles you ran, Floris, and that too it was self-supported. And he has done that in an amazing timing of 17 hours and 46 minutes. Over the years, Floris has documented his running journey on his own YouTube channel with over 2 million views on his Extremilist blog and podcast. His online running coaching programs are very famous. The Marathon PR program and 5K to half marathon program have members in more than 40 countries. That is amazing. And all of them are running faster, happier, and stronger than ever. Floris was born in Netherlands, and he has moved in America, Los Angeles in 2004, where he is currently living with his wife and running with his 2 beautiful young daughters. Floris, it is amazing to have you over here tonight, and welcome you again for our webinar. Our audience, our guests are looking forward to hear from you. Over to you, Floris.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Avik. I really appreciate it. I'm absolutely honored to be here. It has been really exciting to watch what you guys have done with your community. Obviously, the pandemic happening and all of the group running, like kind of all of the different plans changing, and you taking the initiative as an organization to put on such great webinars, educational, to create that sense of community and education. And I'm very, very honored to be here. So thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm going to start sharing my presentation slides now. So my name is Floris Gierman, and I really love talking about running. So that's why I was excited to get invited over here. I'm really much focused on the holistic training approach, and that's what we're gonna dive into in today's webinar over here. So what you can expect in the 30 minutes coming up over here is we're gonna dive into knowing to doing. So how to run a PR with maximum aerobic function. And so in the next 30 minutes, and actually maximum aerobic function, we will talk some more about the principles of this in a little bit, but I've seen you have already had Dr. Phil Maffeton in one of your previous webinars, and this is basically going to be an extension of that as well, how we take some of those learnings and apply it into the running world. So in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share how I ran a 76-minute PR in the marathon, from my first marathon in 4 hours and 11 minutes to my second marathon in 2 hours and 55 minutes with this different training approach. How to implement MAF training into your life, because MAF training really is applicable to runners of all different levels. It's for beginner runners, for intermediate and advanced runners. Runners like young runners, like older runners, men, women, like across the board. Obviously no one is different. Every runner is different, but like we're gonna look at how these different fundamentals apply to different scenarios. We're gonna talk about dealing with frustrations and challenges in low heart rate training, because let's be real, having to slow down on some of your training runs can be quite challenging and frustrating at certain times. So we're going to cover that. And we're going to talk about how to deal with hot and humid conditions, especially in areas like India, where we know some of the humidity and temperatures can go up quite a bit. And that in combination with heart rate training can sometimes definitely be challenging. So we're going to talk through that. And we'll also talk a bit more about the hybrid training approach and high heart rate workouts. Because yes, low heart rate training is one thing, but there's absolutely a time and place for high heart rate running too. And then at the end, there is going to be a Q&A session as well. So we'll have plenty of time. So if you have any questions, just post them up and we'll do our best to answer them over here. I'd like to start out with how I ran a 76-minute PR, because my first marathon training experience was not all that good, really. Like, I really had this training approach of the no pain, no gain mentality, where I thought you just had to go out and run hard, and like that pain was just part of the overall training approach. And I see this happen with so many different runners out there that I didn't really think that there was another kind of training approach. And so there was quite a bit of suffering throughout my initial training journey. However, like, some days were good, but then not all the days really were. The funny thing is, when race day started, I was feeling really good at the beginning of the race. And so I was standing at the corral at the beginning, and I was feeling energized, I was feeling excited, and I saw a lot of people around me. Oh yeah, this marathon running is actually not that hard. I remember after about 16 kilometers, 10 miles into the race, I felt like, yeah, I can totally do this. I hit the halfway point of my first marathon in about an hour 45. So I thought I can totally run my first marathon in sub 3:30. However, then the 30K mile or the 30K point showed up. And this is where I got on the struggle bus. There was like just a very small slight hill. But at that later point in the marathon, that hill felt like I was climbing Mount Everest, and my legs were feeling really heavy. My energy levels started dropping, and I totally started cramping. It really got bad, to a point that my ears started ringing. I couldn't hear well anymore. My vision went in. And this is when I realized that, like, I basically thought to myself, oh, I'm going to die. This is my first marathon. I'm going to die. And this is basically when I just hit the wall in the marathon. And I'm convinced that there's others out there that have experienced similar situations as well, where you start out, you feel really good at the beginning of a marathon, and then all of a sudden, at some point, you just hit that wall. Here's the thing, when that happened, I begged a volunteer at the side of the course to give me some of the Gatorade. I drank some of the Gatorade, got some more energy, but then I still was not really able to run much more. So it was like a slow death march to the finish line. I ended up crossing the finish line in 4 hours and 11 minutes, and I swore that I would never do that again. It was one of those horrible experiences, but it does make you grow as a runner. And so I didn't run for several years. I kind of took a step away from running. However, several years later, I got the new motivation to get back into shape again. This is when my wife was pregnant for my first child, and I wanted to be a fit dad. I wanted to be a good role model to my daughter. And so I decided to start picking up running again. But this time I wanted to go about it differently. I want to find a way to actually have joy in my workouts, to actually go out there and do some more research about what are the different training approaches out there. So this is when I actually came across the work of Dr. Phil Maffetone, and I discovered 3 key lessons really that had changed everything for me. And I totally wish that I would have known these going into some of my earlier races, but this really changed everything for me. And so the 3 key lessons that I learned here was slow down to speed up. And so Dr. Phil Maffetone, he often talks about that concept of when you slow down at a lower intensity, you're actually using body fat for energy instead of your sugar, your glycose. You can run much faster eventually over time, and you don't hit that wall. But at the beginning, you'll have to slow down for several months in your training runs. This was something completely new to me, and we'll talk some more about this in a little bit. The other one was improving nutrition, just realizing how directly affected your energy levels are throughout the day and even on your runs when you improve your nutrition, when you cut out some of your sugars, some of your processed food, your junk food. That made a big difference on me. And then limiting the stress levels too. Stress is so directly related to your overall running performance and how you feel throughout the day. And just becoming more aware of some of those signals in the body, that was a huge difference for me. I've never really experienced that before. And so some of the things that I started noticing, and that you might notice as well with some of this training approach, higher energy levels during and after a workout, faster recovery times and less wear and tear on the body. So all of a sudden, a lot less injuries. Your running pace at MAF will become faster over time. It's not that you're going to be running at a low intensity the entire time. You're actually becoming quite faster. It's just a fascinating process when that happens. And then the enjoyment in the workouts too. I used to really never enjoy running that much. I got some enjoyment here or there, but it was almost like a big task to go out there. And now all of a sudden I was looking forward to all of my runs, and it became much more of a joy. It was much easier for me to run more volume, even though it was mostly at a lower intensity. It became much easier in the process. And then when I got ready for my next marathon, I was able to run that in 2 hours and 55 minutes. And some of the key things that stood out just thinking about this race was I really felt confident going into the race. And this was new to me because all of a sudden I realized I can keep running without getting out of breath. I can keep running without feeling lower on energy. And even when that 30K point came and there were some of the hills, this was the exact same course that I ran several years ago. I was flying over the hills. It didn't even feel like a hill to me at that point anymore. And yes, towards the end, it was still like working hard. And here on the left, you actually see a photo of myself on the left and my pacer friend Damien. He joined me for the last few miles. And it was such a different experience to be able to finish a marathon and finish that strong with some of the same splits in the early kilometers as in the later kilometers over there. And the interesting thing is, I noticed that this didn't just work well for me, but it really started to resonate and started, like, many people around me that started following this training approach too, or that had been using this for a while, started seeing all sorts of success with it. So this was something that I wanted to continue doing. So here's a photo of me actually at 1 mile to go at the Boston Marathon. And this is running strong and controlled at the Boston Marathon and finishing at 2:44. And there were 30 to 40 miles or 20 to 30 miles an hour headwinds over here. So it was very challenging conditions, yet still being able to finish strong and just having that joy in the workout. That was, and on race day as well. So that was definitely a big one. Here, like Avik described earlier, I want to experiment with some of the ultra running as well, because the beautiful part of low heart rate training and this MAF training approach is it doesn't just work well for marathons. It works well for the shorter distances, for 5K, 10K, half marathon, but it works really well in the ultra distances as well. And so here I decided to fill up my water pack and to leave my house at 2 in the morning in Long Beach and run down south for 100 miles, 161 kilometers. And I brought a little GoPro and I made a little video out of it, and it was absolutely a roller coaster, but it was once again just being surprised by how much you're able to accomplish with consistent build-up, with patience, and by increasing your training volume so your body gets used to some of that additional stress, really. Here, a little bit more about me. So this is on the left, you can see my wife and now my 2 daughters. Those are my running partners right there. And I really wanted to, throughout some of these positive race experiences, want to tell a lot more other runners about all of this. And so that's what I'm still doing today. I started 7 or 8 years ago with the Extra Milers blog. And then I started making different YouTube videos. Here I made, for example, a video about heart rate monitor training. This was just me talking into a camera. I never thought much of it. It was just me sharing positively my experiences. And now this is one of the videos that has like 100,000 views on YouTube, which is just crazy to me. And it brings me so much joy to see a lot of other people using this approach as well. When I got into this 7-8 years ago, a lot of people didn't know what this was all about and would often get a lot of negative feedback. Yet over time, I've seen that change completely around, and now a lot more people are going after like a lower heart rate training approach, which is very nice to see there. Here are a few more of the videos that I've made. There's 100+ videos on the YouTube channel at this point, so I had a lot of fun with it. And then I decided to start the Extra Milest Show, which is basically a running video show and a podcast as well, where I interviewed different guests who are all somewhat in line with this holistic training approach. So this looks at the running component, but it also looks at the stress component, the nutrition, the race mindsets, and different things. And the interesting part is here, and I wrote it down at the bottom, 3 key elements that keep coming back in the messaging from some of these different runners is patience, consistency, and having joy in your running. And I think if there's one key takeaway from this webinar, and there's several more as we dive in later, is because you're running at a lower intensity, your body is able to handle more training volume, but you have to be patient throughout that process. That isn't always that easy, but believing in the system and actually putting the consistent miles in, it can bring quite a bit of joy over time as well. And I think this is all connected, and this is just one of the messages that keeps coming back. So very excited about that. So let's dive a little bit further into the 3 key fundamentals, and I'll start mentioning some different examples here as well of how this applies. So to run faster and further, you have to learn how to run slower first. So this is where Dr. Phil Maffetone's 180 formula comes into place, where you subtract your age from 180. And you modify this number by selecting your fitness and health profile. And I'm not going to go into much detail. If you go to philmaffetone.com 180 formula, you just punch that into Google, you will find a great article that talks about this in detail. And this gives you a ballpark training number that works well for most athletes. There might still be some further personalization and customization needed. However, in this example, let's keep it simple. Let's say there's a 40-year-old athlete. It would be 180 minus 40 is 140 heart rate per minute. And so your training zone would be that MAF number of 140 minus 10. So that would be 130 to 140 would be the majority of your training zone throughout the base building period. And one key thing that is so important over here is mindful running. So truly listening to the signals of your body. And I think this is the difference between someone who's just getting into this approach and someone who's been used to slowing down for a while. So for example, some of the key takeaways here are like trying to run without headphones and really being present and paying attention to your breathing, to your cadence, to your footsteps, and listening to your environment, like what's going on around you. Feeling the wind, the snow, the rain, like truly being present in your running. I see too many runners out there who are just putting the headphones on. They are going out there, they're running. And yes, it's one thing to be in the zone. However, try to look around you, try to enjoy, instead of being frustrated that you'll have to slow down some of your miles or some of your intensity, actually trying to find true enjoyment in there, and also checking in with yourself and really adjusting accordingly. So what are your energy levels like? How motivated are you? Are you feeling tired? If so, does it make sense for you to do that long run of 20K today? Or do you maybe want to cut that back a little bit, or try to find out why is it that you're so tired? Do you maybe have to go to bed a little bit earlier? So truly becoming more aware of how are you feeling and what are you going to do about that to change different things. How's your running form? Even little tweaks over there. If you become more aware of your arm swing, for example, truly paying attention to your arm swing or to your lean forward, that you have a natural lean forward, it can all improve you as a runner. And sometimes when you're so consumed into listening to music or like just not paying attention to it, it might not flow all that well. So Here is an example of a MAF test that I want to dive into a little bit because I think this is an important one. Many of you guys are already familiar with MAF tests. I've listened to the Dr. Phil Mafetto webinar that was given here several weeks ago, and you guys have previously already talked about the MAF test, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do think it is a great tool to measure how you are progressing in your running. So real brief, you go to a running track, you warm up for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then you run for, let's say, 8K or 5 miles, or you can even run less. You can do it for 2 miles, 3K, and you measure how fast are you running each of those miles or Ks. And you will notice that your heart rate is going to start going up as your pace is going to slow down as your heart rate stays the same. So you're trying to keep your heart rate at that MAF number. And so there's two different things. So here at the bottom, you see the distance, and then here's the cardiac drift slide. So your pace is the same, but your heart rate will go up. This is if, let's say, you're trying to run a sub 4-hour marathon and you're trying to aim for an even split, you'll notice at the beginning your heart rate is going to be lower. Towards the end, as cardiac drift is happening, your heart rate is going to go up. However, during a MAF test, your heart rate is going to stay the same and your pace is going to slow down. And so that is what I want to experiment, because a typical MAF test would be indeed like a shorter distance, but I was very curious to see as well what would happen if you do this for a longer period of time. So here's an example of that. I went to a track and I went for a 2-hour MAF test at 143 heart rate. And so the first mile, so after 1.6K, I was running a pace of about 4 minutes per kilometer. And that pace becomes slower and slower over time. So after about 16K, so 10 miles in, that pace became 406 minutes per kilometer. And then at the end, after 29 kilometers, I was running a pace of 417. And what you will notice is the more aerobically developed you are, the less that drop off per pace is going to become. It's inevitable that there's still going to be some slowing down. So what's basically happening is your body temperature increases and more of your energy is going towards cooling your body down versus moving your muscles forward. And this is where temperature plays such a huge role in these MAF tests as well. So let's take a look at a few examples. So this whole training approach worked well for me, but it worked very well for many other runners as well. So I just want to share a few examples throughout this presentation. So Amelia, she's 44 years old, and she had to slow down. She used to run many of her paces at 5:35 minutes per kilometer. She had to slow down to an 8:40 minutes per kilometer. And she lives in Colorado, she lives at altitude. However, throughout this process, it became faster and faster again at the same heart rate. And one of the things that she actually said throughout this was, I'm confident that I'm improving. I know that I'm improving. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling stronger. And I'm able to do a lot more things. I've run my best half marathons in 3 years. Another key element that I absolutely want to talk about is nutrition. Because this is one thing that I didn't realize is how much of an impact this makes. So let's recap for a minute. The 3 key things that made the biggest impact on me was 1, slowing down the training with low heart rate running. 2 was nutrition, and 3 was stress. So I want to briefly talk about the nutrition component. I know Dr. Phil Mafetto has talked much more about this previously already in his webinar, so we'll keep it limited. But I used to eat quite a bit of processed food, and I used to think I was eating okay, yet there was still a lot of bread, there was still a lot of pasta, pizza, a lot of different things in there. Once I started realizing how much sugar is actually in everything, so many added sugars, so much processed food, and although it has all the different labels on there of like healthy this, gluten-free that, it can still have a lot of bad things in there. And so just realizing this part and changing to eating more vegetables, more fruits, more nuts, some legumes, some protein, that was all more clean food instead of processed food, it really made a massive difference in how I felt energy levels wise. It wasn't like all of these spikes and all of a sudden in the afternoon you were very in need of caffeine. Like all of a sudden it was much more even. I slept better at night, and without even trying, I started losing quite a bit of weight. And I see this happening across the board with different athletes trying to go not only after the running component, but also after the nutritional component, is that when you eat cleaner, like your body starts functioning more optimal, and just your fat burning abilities improve through there as well. So that was absolutely a really big difference for me. And then the third one, limiting stress. I cannot not address this enough, the importance of stress management, because many people are 24/7 connected these days. It is to a point where people basically are either on their phone or on their computer, or they're multitasking or doing different things. Just realizing that your stress levels are directly impacted by what you're doing outside of running as well. Like, yes, throughout running, you're putting positive stress on your body. However, if you have a lot of different things going on in your personal life, even right now with the whole pandemic situation going on, like we are noticing more and more people saying they're experiencing more uncertainty, higher stress levels, and this directly impacts some of their heart rate, like their resting heart rate, their MAF pace. They're starting to notice all of these different things. So what can you do to limit some of those different stresses? There's a lot. You can start doing, like taking actual time to slow down. It's me here reading a book. I definitely got to do that more, and I got to remind myself. But even making certain times in your schedules to do nothing, to truly let your body and your mind kind of adjust as well, and just digest, like process all of the different information. It's not just your body that has to recover, it's your mind that has to recover as well from all of the input that you're putting in there. Then there's things like journaling. There's things like even a gratitude journal, writing down some of your thoughts on paper, some breathing exercises, some, what else? Meditation. There's so many different tools that you can do there. This is probably my favorite and most important slide of this entire presentation, because I think this obviously is directly correlated to the stress levels as well. So here is the adoption curve. And what we see here, the gray line is the base fitness level. And so when you do a workout, you're putting positive stress on your body, but actually your fitness level right after the workout is actually going down a little bit. You need to recover properly first to get that fitness level back to baseline. And then from there, if you've had proper recovery, there's that super compensation happening, and that's that improvement. And this is gradual, small improvements on top of each other that's going to happen. If you don't allow for enough recovery, which many people don't, that super compensation is not going to happen. And that's a big one. Sleep is the greatest legal performance enhancing drug that most people are probably neglecting. And one big one over here is, if you want to find out how much should you really sleep, is try to go to bed when you're tired and wake up when you naturally wake up without an alarm. Do that for a week and you will actually get a good indication of how much sleep you need. Oh yeah, and by the way, try that without caffeine too. That's like a whole nother topic. But it is fascinating how often, like, oh, we get tired and you just chug a coffee and you can go again. However, watch out, because you're basically artificially messing with your fatigue levels over there. So just something to keep in mind. Here's an example of Francis. He was not improving. He ran himself into the ground, and he finished his runs and he would feel really exhausted. So he was always stressing himself out throughout his workouts, but also not allowing adequate recovery either. And he's saying, like, now I'm enjoying my runs much more in the past 4 months than I have in my entire life. It is just so enjoyable. It's almost like I feel I could get up and run out the door and do another hour. It just feels that good. I've never felt that before. And that is very common, and that is fascinating to see that. Dealing with frustrations and challenges at MAF low heart rate training. So this is the big one, because let's be honest, like, yes, we're so used to running at a certain intensity. And then all of a sudden, we might have to slow down by 2 or 3 minutes in pace than what we're used to. And that is quite a transition. That feels really slow because our actual feeling of what running normal is like has been always a faster pace or a higher intensity. So here are a few different things. So realize that you're not alone. You'll not be walking or running forever. Patience is absolutely key, and we'll talk some more about this. And truly having a beginner's mind and thinking long term. We're not thinking 1 week out or 2 weeks out. We're truly wanting to think 3 months out, 6 months out, maybe 12 months out there, and realize how much small, gradual improvements can start adding up over time. You're almost there, and I see this quite a bit. Some people are trying this approach for, let's say, 4 weeks or 6 weeks or even 8 weeks, and they feel like they're not improving. And with improving, they would only look at their MAF time. Let's say they're running 11-minute mile, and the 11-minute mile is not becoming faster even after 2 months. Realize that this progress is not going to be linear. Sometimes you have to first develop, like de-stress, and you almost have to like just put in the effort, the consistency, the showing up. You're still building stronger muscles, ligaments, tendons, joints, all of these different things. However, here this person in the bottom is almost there, is almost starting to make progress, and has given up, and where the guy at the top is still going for it. So here I think is another very important one, and this is by Maya Angelou. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude, but don't complain. I see too many people complaining versus just accepting and surrendering. And one example of when this quote, this is such a fascinating quote, it applied to me when I ran my first 100-miler. Around 63 miles in, so whatever that is, 105K into the run, I started running out of some of the water. I started, like, my mind started fatiguing, and I started to notice a negative voice coming in your mind. And you might recognize this yourself from race day as well. At some point, you're gonna have higher points and lower points. And I thought of this quote, and it made such a difference to me when I thought, all right, there's nothing I can change right now other than my attitude. So let's not complain. Let's look at what is the problem at hand and what can I do to fix that problem. And when you take that approach into a race as well, I think it really, really makes a big difference there. So how to train on hot and humid days. I know this is very common in different areas where some of the viewers from this webinar are located. So run early in the mornings or late at night. And even that sometimes can still be very hot, but it does make a bit of a difference. Not just with the heat, humidity, but even with the direct sunlight. Run indoors on a treadmill when you can and adjust your pace according to your effort level. Many people think, oh, it's hot outside, it's humid outside, I can just do my heart rate 20 beats higher than it normally is. No, your body is actually indicating there's additional stress on your body, so you want to slow down your pace. You want to take walk breaks if you have to. Split your long runs into 2 shorter runs. So let's say you have 80 minutes on the calendar. Instead of running 80 minutes straight and you see your heart rate normally would go up, you can actually split that into, let's say, 40 minutes in the morning, 40 minutes at night. Run in the shaded areas as much as possible. Limit your runs on concrete. It really does make a difference with heat and sunlight bouncing off the concrete versus running on a trail or a grass or a sandy area. And don't run in the heat if you're not very fit. This is a very important one. And then also hydrate well, but don't overdo it. And truly looking at some of your electrolyte take-in as well. So your sodium, potassium. One other key one, and we did this recently when one of my friends ran an Ironman actually last weekend. It was very hot. And one key thing that helped him a lot on race day was actually using an ice bandana. So we tried to keep his neck cool. And that right there, putting an ice bandana there, will actually have the blood that goes towards your brain actually get cooled down as well. And that helps the body cooling down process too. So key elements of your training program. Yes, low heart rate training is important. However, there's so many other key fundamentals here that I want to talk through for a little bit. So warm up and cool down. Very important to get your body ready for the workout. I see too many athletes just going out there and starting their workout way too quick. I will tell you, if you do a proper warm-up, it makes your heart rate much more controlled throughout the rest of the workout as well, versus your body almost going in a fight or flight response and the heart rate shooting up. So properly letting the heart rate go up gradually. It's going to even start out with a walk, and then from a walk gradually increasing that pace can make a big difference there. And same with the cool down, telling your body you're getting ready to, like, that was the end of the workout, and then the recovery process can begin. The aerobic runs, absolutely the fundamentals, the foundation runs over here. Long runs, very key for not only like the aerobic development, but also from a mental perspective, getting ready for longer distances on race day. Knowing what it feels like to run a certain distance will make a difference there too. Like the mental component is such an important one there. Moderate to higher intensity running. And I see too many people who think that the MAF training approach is only low heart rate running, and that's simply not the case. There is a base building period. For some athletes, this might be 10 weeks, 12 weeks. For some athletes, this might be 6 months. This really depends on the athlete, previous fitness levels, age of an athlete, how you're dealing with different training volumes. There's no one size fits all with this is how long you should be doing low heart rate training. This is something that you have to learn to read the signals of your body. And then when you're ready to start adding some higher intensity workouts, this can be a variety of different things between set intervals, set paces, fart legs, tempo runs. All of these things are an important part as well. And I do think these will come in really greatly beneficial for race day as well. As much as I've seen many people run very strong PRs, even by only running at low heart rate, I think sometimes at some point your aerobic process is going to hit a plateau, and then the higher intensity can help kick that plateau to the next level again, and you can continue to improve aerobically that way. Plus, knowing what it feels like to run a certain pace that you're anticipating on running on race day with some of your higher intensity training workouts is good there too. The drills they can easily be integrated throughout your workouts, and this can be a variety of different things, but it can help with like shorter ground contact time, improving the springs on your ankles, just making you a more efficient runner there. Cross training, I think in particular for athletes in their 40s, 50s, 60s, adding some cross training in there can help so that you're not only running all the time, and it takes some of the running pressure off the body. Strength training, anyone in the age of 30 or over should absolutely integrate strength training. Mainly because you start to lose muscle mass. Every year you start to lose muscle mass, and if you don't maintain that, you're just basically losing that. So absolutely important. Rest and recovery, we need that. Sometimes I see people running 12 hours a week, whereas if they actually would run a bit less and allow the body to rest and recover more, that adaptation would actually happen. And then training the mind, visualization, what's going to happen on race day? How do you build some strong mind muscles as well? It's absolutely, there's very different techniques that you can apply there of becoming a stronger athlete, not just physically, but mentally over there as well. So in the past 8 years, I've often been asked, like, what is it like to like develop one of these? Like, how do I apply this further to my own running? Like, how does a training schedule like this looks like? Or I've also received a question like, can you coach me? And this is where I've actually developed 2 different online running coaching programs. One is the 5K to half marathon program. One is the marathon PR program. And these are online coaching programs where we have access to a lot of different videos, different heart rate related training schedules for the 5K, the 10K, different race paces, and then also like the sub 3 hour marathon, the Boston qualifiers, the different schedules are all in there. So more information is available on either one of those websites. And at this point, we've built up a really fun community with runners in more than 40 different countries. And even later today, we have a few different Zoom calls with members, and we're just going to talk through some of the different questions that come up and different challenges and whatnot along the way. So here's just one more story that I actually want to share in closing, because I thought this was such an interesting one. Here's an example of Jonathan, 46 years old, from Canada. And he always tried to improve his running, and he was hitting certain walls he just couldn't break through. He truly wanted to run a sub 3-hour marathon. And finally, he was able to do that on the age of 46. And he actually wrote, like, it wasn't just about the running and about the training, but also about the physiological aspect of it, about the nutritional aspect. At the age of 46, this is a time when I expect to be slowing down and not getting these fast race time. And it feels great to be speeding up. And that is the thing, like, I'm so excited to see examples like this constantly in the Extra Milers Facebook group, in our training programs, like across the world, of different runners just improving their running by taking a different training approach out there, and not killing themselves in their workout, but actually totally finding joy in a more holistic training approach, looking at the running component and then looking at the stress component and the nutritional component, the mindset. It's all connected. So yeah, that was my presentation right there. I want to hand it over to see if there were any questions. Oh yeah, before I forget, I'm available on all of these different channels like YouTube, Strava, Instagram, and the website is extramilers.com. So
Floris, it was wonderful hearing you out. I wish we could have heard you for a little longer, but a lot of things I learned from you, and I'm sure the audience really liked it. So most of us has gone through this situation where we have hit the wall during our first marathon or half marathon. And we could relate to your story when you have mentioned your journey. And from there on, how you have educated yourself, how you have learned from the mistakes that you have made and corrected them. And it was one of the race that you will never forget, because you have cut down with a huge amount of time. Thank you, Floris, for taking out time from your busy schedule and making us learn about all of these aspects. So I would like to take up a few questions from our audience. And I myself have a lot of questions that I would request you to answer here in this forum.
Absolutely, let's do it. I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first thing, there is a misconception about this entire MAF thing, and I see a lot of questions already coming in, that the understanding of a layman or a runner who is new into MAF, they understand that MAF training is only about slowing down. So their question to you is, how do they improve if they always do slow runs? But I know you have mentioned that in your presentation, but if you can elaborate a bit about it.
Absolutely, happy to. So what is basically happening is when you're slowing down, let's say the example runner that we looked at earlier, it was someone who is 40 years old, who would be running at a heart rate of 140. If that athlete previously was always running at an intensity of, let's say, 160, they were always putting a lot of stress on their body. They were always running at a higher intensity. And so they were never using much of their body fat for energy. They were always trying to burn that sugar, that glucose, glycogen. And so if they never activate this system, their body doesn't know how to use that properly. So what we want to do is we want to slow down your actual running pace so that most of your runs are in that 130 to 140 zone. All of a sudden your body is learning, like, hey, there's another fuel source. This is an unlimited supply. If I now get more access to it, if I now learn how to use that properly. And so when that actually happens, all of a sudden you start seeing gradual progress. It doesn't happen fast overnight. And this is why I think the other elements are so important, that it's not just the running component, but also what you eat. If you're eating a lot of junk food, it's really hard to still get access to optimizing your body fat usage. for energy. And that's the same with your stress levels as well. If you're super stressed, you're in that fight or flight response, your cortisol levels are higher. You're basically blocking your fat burning abilities right there. And this is why it's so important to not just look at the running component, but also at some of these other components. And once that starts to work together, all of a sudden you start to gradually see some improvements. And then it almost becomes this vicious cycle of like that motivates you once again to get some more progress. And you want to like start paying closer attention to like, okay, let me see if, for example, I would sleep a little bit more. How would that impact my performance? One example that I forgot to mention in the presentation that I do think is very important here is the power of sleep. And we talked briefly about Matthew Walker there. But I've seen certain people in our coaching programs, actually, they used to sleep only 5 hours a night, and they were not progressing in their MAF times. When all of a sudden I asked them, like, there's a few different questions I would ask, like, what is your sleep like? And we found that out, and I said, try to sleep 7 to 8 hours a night. Within 4 weeks, this person shaved off 40 seconds per mile just by sleeping more. And I think that's why it's so important to look at the other elements over here too.
Okay, that answers the question, Floris. So what I understand is MAF training is a kind of base building thing where we will slow down, and it can vary from a person to person. And it's not about only slow running. We will gradually build up with the pace, and that's how we will prepare for an event or a race. So
absolutely,
that answers the question. So another question from our audience, that when you say about a 2-hour MAF test, so it's about measuring the progress, right? Like how the heart rate, with a constant heart rate, with your MAF heart rate, how much you are progressing on the pace aspect. Now here, as you have mentioned that the nutrition plays a key role. Now, do you suggest during a race or during a MAF test, do you suggest us to take gels during the run? What is your take on this?
It is a great question. Here's the main thing. So typically the purpose of a MAF test is to see what is your current running pace at like your MAF heart rate. And you try to do that, let's say every 4 weeks, so that you get a timestamp of like, all right, right now my pace is this. In 4 weeks, my pace is that. I'm either improving, I'm staying the same, or I'm not improving. And from there, you can make further modifications to your training if needed. And so with the actual MAF test, typically people do them for a shorter period of time, whether it's like 30 minutes or 60 minutes. When you would go out for a much longer MAF test, which is not that common, typically, like I have taken gels on like a 2-hour MAF test, because I was still running at a like relative fast pace. And at that point, I did feel like it would benefit me. However, if you're doing a shorter MAF test, I wouldn't necessarily go in there and start putting your body full of sugars and other things. So that, once again, I would say for some athletes, it's different than for other athletes as well. Some athletes are totally used to running without taking in anything, whereas other athletes are still having to get used to running and letting their body absorb what they're putting into their bodies efficiently. So it is trainable over time as well. That's one other thing that I would say, is that if you are so used to taking sport drinks or energy gels or whatever, even on your training runs, like try it next time, even if it's a little bit shorter, without taking them, and see how your body responds. And very often it's a mental thing that you think you need it. And actually when you do cut it out, like your body does get used to that as well.
Absolutely. I got it, Floris. I have a question from Ash, who is also a co-host of our today's webinar. So Ash wants to know, how do you strategize your hydration and nutrition during a race?
That's good. I strategize it in a way that I do in my long runs as well. And so I think long runs are the ultimate test for what to expect on race day. And this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Like what works for me might not work for you. And this is personally, I still run with actual gels. And the main reason is that I've had it a few times in a race where I came through an aid station. I relied on the aid station having something and they didn't have it, and it threw me off personally. And so at this point, I take what has worked really well for me is my spring energy gel. And I would put like 5 in my pockets, and I would take one at set intervals. And I would try to drink at rather set intervals as well. Like if it's an actual race where there's aid stations, I would just drink it at the aid stations. However, if I'm doing like a self-supported run, I try to like at least set an alarm on my watch so it becomes a reminder of when I should be taking in some of the calories and some of the gels. I have noticed sometimes during the later stages of a race, it's very easy to forget to take in either water or calories. And this is where I think setting an alarm can be beneficial there.
Absolutely. Got the answer. Thank you, Floris. So I have a question from Neera. So what was your mileage, weekly mileage, when you are training for the prestigious Boston Marathon?
That was, so I think it's a good question. What I think sometimes is missing is what has been happening in the build up to it. This was basically 18 months of gradually building up the training volume. And so it wasn't that I was starting from zero. It was already like I was running comfortable, consistent around 50 or 60 miles per week. And then from there on, you have a base fitness level already. So if you then start running, for me, it was about 80 miles a week, like from 70 to 85. Like that is what worked well for me. If I started adding more, my fatigue levels become too high. It really depends on what other things you have going on in your life as well. If you have full-time job, you have a lot of obligations, if you have a lot of, like I have 2 kids that require time and energy as well, it is different how much training volume and training stress you can handle versus if you're like, you're single, you have 0 obligations and you have a simple job that might not require that much time and you can focus much more on the training. So this is where it becomes a personal, like how much feels best, and learn how to listen to the signals of your body so that you can realize, all right, this is a good amount for me. This is me pushing it too much in my training volume.
Brilliant answer, I would say. Like, yes, the way you have touched base on this part, that it depends on an individual and the other workloads of life. We cannot look up to another person and set up my weekly mileage, or cannot set up my training plan.
Yeah, trust me, I look at other podcast guests that I've had on my show, and like I look at someone like Jonathan Walton, who consistently is able to run, let's say 100 miles or 120 miles a week. And I'm like, wow, that would be so great. I could run such a strong marathon PR if I would do that. However, my body wouldn't currently be able to handle it with some of the other things. And I'm on purpose deciding that. And I think for every athlete, you have to make a choice. What is most important in your life at that point, and what decisions are you making with how much time you want to train and how much time you feel like you want to train? Because once again, if you're not recovering well, I could be running that many hours, but the body doesn't absorb that training correctly. So.
Exactly, I agree to this. Floris, we have another question, a very interesting question, I would say. And I'm sure most of us would be looking for an answer from you on this. You have mentioned about the training aspect in a hot and humid weather. But in a country like India or any other tropical countries, the weather changes, the humidity level is quite high. And we train with a certain race pace in our mind. And we go to the race day and see the weather condition is quite different. It's much more humid. And so how do you strategize your pacing at that point of time? Like when you have trained your mind, you have trained your body, you have invested a good number of 4 to 6 months in building up something. And then you realize the moment you start the race that no, this is not the right pace for the day. How do you act on that?
I think there is, kind of going back to the fundamentals, many people are so focused on what is my goal time, what is my goal pace, what is my goal. Whereas I like the approach in the initial stage is more of like, let's get the fundamentals in place. let's build my aerobic base. Let's improve aerobically. As we get closer to race day, we can have a rough estimation, a rough idea of where we think that race day pace is going to end. However, I see many people actually run their fastest races if they just let the race day fall the way it's going to fall and run the best race they can on race day. Because yes, you can be training all you want for a specific pace, but like you said, there's a lot of different things that can change. And I think this is where the mindset becomes so important as well. If you're so fixated on certain pace of like, I want to hit this, but you might not be realistic about how you're going to execute that. And a perfect example for me, actually, last December, I was running the CIM marathon. And I thought I would be able to execute on a certain pace. I thought I would be able to execute like on that day and run a strong race. I started out and it absolutely didn't go according to plan. And sometimes that is the case as well. We try to do the best we can to run a certain pace, but sometimes it's better for us to be realistic of like, these are the circumstances. We can't change that the weather is all of a sudden this much warmer or this much more humid. And so it's better for us to go out there and run the best day we can on race day versus us trying to stick absolutely to a certain split and hoping for dear life that we don't hit the wall at 30K. So.
Got it, Floris. Floris, what according to you, this is a question from Rajiv, what according to you is the right cadence that one should try to achieve?
Cadence is an interesting topic because yes, as much as you can say like, oh yeah, 170 to 180 is optimal for all runners. Once again, if you're trying to, like I see two different approaches here. Like Danny Dreyer, for example, he's the founder of G Running, and he has spoken on my podcast about cadence in quite a bit of detail. And he says actually running with a metronome and setting that to a certain cadence, and even if that is, let's say 170 or 180, and you're trying to stick with that and you're trying to run, relax and lean your body forward, and too many people get quite tense. But actually, if you get used to taking smaller steps, gradually over time, you become more aware of the overall cadence. And from there on, like that starts to feel natural. At the other hand, there's also the part of like, you're so used to running in a certain way. Now you're going to run at a slower intensity. And all of a sudden, your cadence becomes much slower as well. I see both camps. At the other hand, I do feel that I focus personally mostly on heart rate. And I don't necessarily try to force too many elements at once. I see quite a few people going after and trying to run at low heart rate and trying to focus on cadence, then trying to do nasal breathing, then doing intermittent fasting, and then let's go keto as well. I'm like, keep it simple. Like at the end of the day, if my key thing is low heart rate training and doing a MAF test to see if I'm improving over time. And when you start seeing your pace improve, your body naturally will start falling into place as well. And I think if you have 20 things to think about, once again, talking about the mindset, you start to not run relaxed. I think it's so important to run relaxed. So this is, yes, you can go for 170, you can go for 180. I would focus more on the actual heart rate component and let the cadence become a secondary element of that.
Absolutely agree, Floris. Okay, here we have another question and quite an interesting one from Dylan. So he has first of all thanked you for the amazing presentation that you have showed to all of us. His question is, what is the relationship between MAF and VO2 max? How do you relate both of them?
It is a really good question. And it goes kind of hand in hand with a question that comes up so many different times of, I see my MAF pace is one thing and I see my VO2 max is another. And when you look at many of the calculators of VO2 max, also when you look at the Garmin would give a VO2 max, like the Coros, all of these different watches would give a VO2 max number. And a lot of that calculation is actually directly attributed to some of the higher heart rate running as well. That is much more important for that. And the lower intensity running, the watch almost doesn't know what to do with all of the lower intensity running. And so it scores it's much lower. I personally never look at the VO2 max number. And I, once again, look at the actual MAF number and see if that is trending in the right direction. If I see my pace is here 1 month, the next month it is improving, I know I'm on the right track. If it's not improving, I'm trying to see like, what are the elements that are blocking this? Is the weather different? That's why it's good to write down the temperature. Is my stress levels higher? How did I sleep the night before? What was my nutrition like? Like all of these different elements. Whereas with VO2 max, you don't really get that same idea. And that's why I feel that is a more important metric for me to look at in my training journey.
Absolutely agree, Floris. Here we have another question from you. So the question is from Milind Rai. How can one run a long run, example 2+ hours, when heart rate would anyways go up eventually due to constant stress, even when you run at a slow pace?
Slow down. The biggest thing would be like, yeah, if you want to run for 2 hours, yes, you're going to see that cardiac drift happening, right? The slide that we saw earlier, you see your heart rate go up over time. If you are, and especially in warmer temperatures, it is challenging, even for myself or other advanced athletes. We see when it's hot out, it's much more challenging. And so, yeah, we can do all we can to cool the body. We can hydrate plenty. We can do all of these different things. At some point, a 2-hour run becomes challenging in hot conditions. So here's the thing though, if you do build up some more training volume in general, even by splitting up some of your runs in shorter runs, over time, this helps improve your fitness level as well. And if you feel like you can run more natural by running for 40 minutes or for 60 minutes, and then like over time, you'll improve more and more. And then even the long runs, you're going to have to do less walking and you can run more consistently. So.
Understood. Floris, this question is from my side. You have mentioned about a holistic approach of training and recovery, and a very nice way to take up life. Basically, that's what I understand. You have mentioned about base building, strength training, long runs, speed workouts, recovery. So how do you balance them out over a period of week? Say when you're training for a marathon and you have n number of things to do, how do you balance them out over a period of week? How much importance do you give to each one of these aspects? And how do you build it up towards your rest day?
That is a really great question. And that is the thing. I feel when you would, let's say as an athlete, have 10 hours of training available a week, I've personally been guilty of it myself, that I would focus most of my time on running 10 hours a week. And I would be thinking, that is what would make me a stronger runner. This is what develops my running more. Because you feel like that's where you're putting in the effort. Yet, the strength training, especially for the later stages of a race, yes, you might not feel it necessarily the next day, or you might not see that in your MAF number improving, or you might not. However, at 30K into a race, when your quads are starting to kill you, you are very happy that you actually end up doing that strength training. So I think realizing and setting X amount of time available for each of these elements, that's the same with mobility and flexibility. Yes, in the moment you might not necessarily feel it because it takes time for the body to adapt. However, this is where I think actually looking at, this is my total time available, and this is the running component. Let's say that is 7 hours a week. How many additional hours do I want to spend on some of these other categories? And this is where I think you can get creative as well. For example, last night, I was watching my daughters and we ended up jump roping in front of the house. Well, there it is. We're end playing, yet at the same time, I'm strengthening my springs. I'm like working on 1 foot jump ropes, and it's actually improving my balance. There's so many different ways that you can do it. I think it's just about being creative. Like even right now, I'm standing behind a standing desk. And so I'm integrating like just movement throughout the day. I'm like, I have a stretch board over here that from time to time I would. So I think you can start getting creative. Like in the corner is a kettlebell. I would walk out to the restroom. I would do some kettlebell strength. Boom, that's your strength training. And so when you start making it an integrated part of your day, I think it's much more like that versus now I'm going to the gym for an hour. Now I'm going to do that. just becomes more throughout the day of an integration.
Amazing. Like, yeah, I can relate to this, and it's a very nice way of addressing, Floris. Thank you very much for taking up all the questions and giving so much examples. And these examples, we all can relate to it. It's not that something very bookish. That's what I like about you. There is a question from Apurva. At which frequency the MAF test need to be repeated? Is it miles dependent or time dependent?
So with that, as far as for frequency, I see some people going for like they would do it every week. And the thing is, I think if you do it too frequent, you start getting too data obsessed. I think doing it on a monthly basis is better because then you truly allow your body for some improvements versus like, all right, this time I did this, next week I did that, I'm not improving, what's going on? And you start once again becoming stressed out almost about it. As far as for looking at time or looking at distance, either one works really. It's up to you to pick one that you feel is good. I would always do it under the same circumstances. So whether you go to the same running track and you run it there, or if you have a local route that you keep running, just write down some of the key elements from that workout. So what was the temperature, the humidity, where did you do it? Because if one week you do it at 8,000 foot elevation and the next time you do it at sea level, there is absolutely a difference in there. If there's a lot of wind, if there's like certain race condition or training conditions, you just want to write it down. At the beginning, athletes can do a much shorter MAF test, even if you do it for 2 kilometers or for 1 mile or for 2 miles. Because realistically, some people are simply not ready yet to be able to go out there and run 8 kilometers or 5 miles. They simply haven't built up that far yet, especially if their MAF pace is a bit slower. They're going to be running a MAF test for an hour and a half right away. That is much too long at the beginning. So just split it up into shorter ones, and as you progress further, like you can make the MAF test a bit longer. Got the point, Floris. There's another question, maybe a couple of more questions we would like to take, and I know we are taking a lot of your time. But, oh, no worries. I just downed a little bit of coffee, so I'm ready. Let's go. Oh, thank you very much. So here's a question from Suresh. Do you suggest interval training if there is regression in MAF training? If yes, can you please elaborate? Yes and no. So here we go again with the depends, but I will elaborate. As far as for when you're going back in your MAF pace, I would first try to identify what is it, why is it that you're going backwards? If that is because you have improved for several months, and at this point you've almost hit a plateau and you need to start adding in some speed work to get to that next level, absolutely, start adding in some intervals. However, if you have not really seen much progress and you start seeing some going backwards, maybe it is that you're very stressed. Maybe it is that are you eating optimal? Is your body truly recovering well? And sometimes it takes a hard look in the mirror to realize that you're quite stressed. And so many people that I talk to have actually told me in the last 4 months, my MAF pace is slowing down. And I absolutely think it's directly related to the uncertainty that's going on in the world right now. And we not knowing what's happening. And there's so many new things. There's so many things that are out of our control, really. And realistically, that is what stress is, not feeling under control. And so I think being realistic, and instead of at that point adding in speed work, which adds even more stress to the body, maybe actually just listen to those signals, and maybe you should just put in some more lower intensity running. That being said, sometimes also instead of like, yes, going out there, now I'm going to run 8 times 800 with this many minutes in between. Going out there and just running fartlegs, so letting your heart rate go up for certain periods of time and just having speed play can be a really fun way to start integrating some speed work as well. And it's good for the mind too, that it's not just a structured program, but it's more like just going out there and running and having fun. And whether you do that on a flat terrain or you do that in the hills, it's a nice way to integrate some speed work. Got the point, Floris.
I think it answered the question. So I would like to take one last question, and then we will. I know this is a never-ending thing, and people would be always interested to listen a lot from you. But yes, we have your YouTube videos, we have your podcast. We can always go back there and have all the questions or have a lot of information from there. So I have a question where Nikhil has asked you, I am 3 months into MAF and still walking a lot. For 4-hour marathoner, my MAF pace is 8.30 minutes per kilometer. Is there any issue in walking a lot for my MAF?
I would say, like after 3 months and 8:30, like I'm always curious to see like how has the athlete progressed. Was it first 9 minutes per kilometer? Is it now down to 8:30? If that is the case, I would say keep doing what you're doing, and over time you're building more strength. However, if at some point you feel you can start integrating some speed work that could help at that point. Walking for many people is the reality of them being aerobically not that developed yet. And there's many different ways that you can go about walking, whether you just go out and you run, you slow it down whenever your heart rate alarm goes off to a walk, or you actually go out there and you walk and then you set certain intervals of slow jogging. There's different ways of going about it. I don't think it's a bad thing. I would look at what is your overall training volume too, because at some point you might want to increase the amount of walking that you do if you feel your body is recovering enough. But over time, that 8:30 should come down further. And here's the thing, if you truly feel that you have made all the right steps and you take an honest look, like, all right, I've been doing this MAF training for this long. If you feel that there might be some tweaking needed, like, yes, this 180 formula is a great basic fundamental formula. However, there are outliers, people with a higher max heart rate or a lower max heart rate, where this number might be a bit lower or higher. So yes, you can go to a medical lab to get tested, but you could also start playing around a bit more with that number to further personalize it for you. This doesn't mean right away start doing MAF plus 10, because I see too many people doing that too. So like first, slowing down at your pace, being patient with it, being consistent with it. But if you need some further fine tuning at that point, start playing around with it, writing it down in your journal and documenting what's working and what you might want to tweak some further.
So, Floris, this is a question that Nandan has asked, and I'm also very impatient to ask you. So I was thinking that no, I will hand it over to my colleague and end it over here. But no, I would like to take this question. Nandan has asked, so what do you suggest, and what is more preferable? Is it a wrist-based heart rate tracker or a chest wrapper? Which one is more accurate, and what is that you suggest everyone who is following MAF to use?
Absolutely, a chest heart rate strap is more predictable and more accurate than a wrist-based heart rate monitor. And I've honestly even asked some of the CEOs of the heart rate tracking companies who are making the watches, is this what is the most accurate? And at this point, they haven't been able to develop the watch good enough that it gives the same accuracy as a chest heart rate strap. So there are many different heart rate straps out there on the market. Personally, I run with a Coros watch, and I have a chest heart rate strap by Garmin. There are many different models out there. I've used a soft strap by Garmin. I've used Heart Rate Try, and I've used Heart Rate Run. There are many other different brands out there of heart rate watch monitors. The one thing I would say is I've tried several different ones from unknown brands that have been sent to me as samples to test. And some of them are very accurate, and some of them have had quite inaccurate data too. So my one suggestion would be, if you buy a heart rate monitor, to buy one from a brand recognized company, whatever you feel that may be.
Thank you, Floris. Thank you very much for your time and answering all our questions as per expectations, and being so patient with us, and delivering such a nice PPT and presenting it so calmly and explaining it with all live examples. I would like to thank you again,